Well, good morning, everyone. Great to be here in person at the Emira Innovation Exchange. And we have a whack of people online as well. I'm Rob Greenwood. I'm Associate Vice President, Public Engagement and External Relations for Memorial and Director of the Leslie Harris Center of Regional Policy and Development, the Harris Center. And it's that role I'm playing here today with a Harris Center Synergy session. We've done these for 18 years now, but we haven't done any in person for a while. So it's great to be doing that. I'm pleased to welcome you to our session, When Failure Sparks Growth. Failure of Consilient Technologies in Newfoundland and Labrador, a seeding of an industry, with a question mark. Today's session is happening, as I say, both in person and virtually, as we're streaming live via Zoom to our online audience. We have close to 100 people last count, and joining by the minute as we're getting ready to start. We'll be taking questions after the researchers give their presentation, and we invite anyone online to type your questions into the Q&A or the chat box, and Boyan and Mandy will be helping to make sure we keep track of them and get them to our esteemed panel. Also, please remember to mute yourself if you're online or if you're in the room. I look at Dave Freshwater as I say that. So we don't have any ambient noise. We'll call that politely ambient noise or echoing. This session will also be recorded so folks can watch it online afterwards. Visit our website, www.mun.ca/Harris Center to access that video later today. And the team have a paper that they've written for the Harris Center that's on that site now. So go there and read in depth. For those of you here in person, it's nice to see you. Lots of colleagues I've known for years and some I haven't seen for 30 years. So great to have you here. Before we begin in earnest, I want to acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups. And we acknowledge with respect the histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. We encourage everyone to reflect on these lands and those where you are located today, and to consider the Indigenous peoples for whom these lands are traditional territory. Now, it's my pleasure to start with the panel and do introductions. And Dr. Blair Winsor, who initiated this project, is not going to present. He's known very demeaning, self-effacing guy, and he's a terrible presenter. So now he'll be very active in the Q&A, but he's asked his colleagues to lead in the presentation. Dr. Winsor is an associate professor of business administration at Memorial University, whose research efforts focus on entrepreneurship in the province. Blair completed his doctorate at the University of Warwick's Business School in 2010. By far the best business school in the world. There's several of us who have Warwick as a common denominator. He also has a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Memorial, a Bachelor of Laws from the University of Ottawa, and an MBA from Italy's Luigi Bocconi Commercial University. Point out that he did 2 of those degrees, one in French, one in Italian, going there without speaking the language. So pretty scary guy, really. He joined Memorial's Faculty of Business Administration in 2013, having previously taught entrepreneurship, innovation management, and small business management at Edinburgh Napier University in the United Kingdom. In addition to his academic pursuits, Blair has, over the last 40 years, been an entrepreneur, angel investor, and consultant in the UK, the US, and Canada. Welcome, Blair.
Thank you, Rob. Just one slight correction, although there were many fibs in that, which I will not correct. But the idea for this work came to me from Jacqueline Bartlett and from Natasha Hudson. Both came to me around, I cannot remember when exactly, but both came to me around the same time. And I had been out of the province and had never heard of Consilient.
Oh, wow.
When they first talked to me about it. So I did not initiate this, the idea for this work.
Right on. Well, I told you, self-effacing once again.
That is a first, actually. He always takes credit.
You can get the tenor of the panel. We all know each other well. So Also joining us is Dr. Jacqueline Bartlett, an associate professor, tech sector in the Faculty of Business Administration at Memorial. She is a former director of Technology and Innovation Law Clinic at the Schulich School of Law at Dalhousie University. Dr. Bartlett has been practicing corporate and intellectual property law and working directly with the small tech firms for 20 years. In addition, she holds a PhD in intellectual property law and researches and publishes on issues relating to economic development, entrepreneurship, and innovation. She has also taught entrepreneurship and strategy for several years and has been a collaborator with the Harris Center many times. Welcome, Jack. And finally, and in the room, not just overseas today, Dr. Colin Mason. Dr. Mason is professor of entrepreneurship in the Adam Smith Business School at the University of Glasgow. His research is on entrepreneurship and regional development, with specific research focus on entrepreneurial finance and on entrepreneurial ecosystems, specifically business angel investing. He was one of the first academics to undertake research on business angels, co-authoring early studies of the UK business angel market in the early 1990s. Since then, he has undertaken numerous studies of the business angel investment process, including their initial screening process, post-investment involvement, and investment returns. For more than 10 years, he has been the lead author of the Canadian National Angel Capital Association, NACO, annual report on investment activity, and has spoken at many of their events. Pardon me. He was joint winner of ESRC's 2015 Outstanding Impact in Business Award for his research on business angels and was a member of the 2021 REF Business and Management Panel. Welcome, Colin. So you can see we have a superpower panel here for this topic. And I'm delighted now to hand it over to Jacqui and Colin, who are going to lead the presentation, and then we'll get into Q&A and take it from there.
Thank you. So the first thing I need to say is I'm a Consilient alumnus.
Alum.
I worked at Consilient for 3 years, maybe. One of it maybe as an external legal counsel, and then a couple of years internal as I wore many hats, but I was the legal counsel, and I think I had a title director of international affairs, which means I sorted out a lot of our international logistics. And I'm thrilled to stand here because this is a story I always thought needed to be told, and apparently Natasha did as well. But for those of you here in the room or on the line who have worked with or for Consilient, when you first saw the news reports about the money and the failure and the millions of dollars, I'm sure you were like me saying, but there was a lot of good that happened in that company and that needs to be talked about. So that is the perspective from which we approach our I'll hit 4 buttons and one of them will work.
The right arrow should be the one.
It's like the slide across.
And Jacqui will handle, or Mandy will hand you that.
Yes, it's all good. So the perspective, and there were many perspectives we could have taken. There's a whole bunch of stories that we could talk about with Consilient, but the one that we really wanted to tell the story of was based on this whole idea of government funding and how governments all around the world, in Canada and definitely in Newfoundland, we provide financial assistance to startup companies. We attract companies into our province, we pick up failing companies, and we all read that in the news. But the other thing that we do is that we support startups from the beginning and to help them scale. And we know they fail. The startup community fails. That is part of the journey, right? But failure is something that we have a hard time getting our heads around and maybe thinking about it from the positives. And I was thinking this morning when I read the first version of the report and the word fail was everywhere in the report. I thought, oh, I don't know if we should keep using the word fail. And then I thought, let's just say it, fail. Let's just get over the word fail and look at it from a different perspective. So I was happy that we kept it in and it's in the title. This isn't really failure. So we know that there was a lot of criticism, but wasted money, government spends on the startup community. But we wanted to tell it from another perspective. And Consilient was the perfect story to have that conversation. So we are looking at, in our study, the impact of Consilient's failure on the ecosystem in Newfoundland and Labrador. It's really the basis for our study. And Colin will get into the findings and the data, and I'm just going to spend a few minutes introducing Consilient for those of you that may not be aware of the company and what happened, how it started, how it ended, that type of thing. So next slide, Mandy, please. Okay, so Consilient started in 2000 by Trevor, who is on the line. Hello, Trevor. And Rod White, who's in the back of the room. Thank you for coming, Rod. Appreciate it. And both Trevor and Rod came from various places, but most recently, before starting Consilient, they were part of Stratus Global. And they can tell that story if they like, but it was a satellite company that moved to the US. I won't get into too much detail about that. Some of you are familiar with how that went down. Okay. Need to go back for me. Oh, I'm back myself. Good. So back in 2000, those of you who were around, the tech sector in Newfoundland was not really a tech sector. It was in very early stages. And there were a few companies around. I use the word first, but there were a few other companies around. Telepix comes to mind because I had some early dealings with Telepix. They were also doing their own unique software development, but they had a very different story. But for many people in Newfoundland, Consilient had a lot of firsts. It was a company developing software in the cell phone industry. And at the time, BlackBerry was pretty much the only game in town, and some other cell phones were coming online. I remember us in the early days walking around with the latest and greatest cell phones as employees of Consilient. We got to test cell phones. You can imagine in 2000 how exciting that was. I remember my first Motorola Razor, bringing it home and showing my husband, wow, look what I get to take home from work. Like, it was really exciting for us to see all that in those early days. We don't even think about our cell phones today like we did back then. So it was very exciting times. So there were many firsts. It was really one of the few companies who was actually developing a product. There were many consulting firms, people who were working for government on government contracts, but there were very few who were actually out there building products, and Consilient was one of them. Some of the other firsts, I think maybe this is more of a personal reflection, but Consilient was very out there. You know, a lot of people never knew who Telepix was, but it was doing similar types of services. But Consilient decided it needed to be out into the public eye. They hired marketing very early on and got some great press, the Globe and Mail. I remember Trevor winning top 40 under 40 and the 100 best managed companies from Ernst & Young back then, doing them a couple of years in a row. Like they were celebrated and people talked about it. So the firsts were very well known, right? A lot of the successes became very popular, and Consilient became very well known for a lot of the things it did. But from a company perspective, it hired some really interesting graduates from Memorial. That was a new thing at the time. It was developing cutting edge technology. It was traveling. People, employees were traveling all over the world. That wasn't happening a whole lot. Employees in Newfoundland. And so it was a true born global, as we say in entrepreneurship. It started out early days developing software to export out of Newfoundland and mostly of Canada. So there were a lot of firsts. It was one of the first companies to have local angel investment in the tech sector. It was one of the first companies to have VC investment in Newfoundland. So there were a lot of firsts that came along with Consilient. And the successes, like I said, a lot of people had very positive things to say, and we'll talk all about that. So there was a lot of good that came out of Consilient. I'm just thinking of a story. One of our employees went all over the world, and I remember the time, let's see if you remember, we had an opportunity to do work in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And I did the research to figure out, what was going on there. The banking system was corrupt. We couldn't find a lawyer to talk to us there. There was a war and strife, and finally we couldn't find an employee who wanted to go to the Democratic Republic of Congo and sit there and try to get cell phone software for cell phones sold to the government. I don't think we ever went to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, but these were the things that we did, and employees went all over. So it was very exciting times, and in a very sexy industry, the cell phone world, which was just starting to become popular. So we have some great stories that we can all tell about Consilient, but Consilient was heavily funded by government grants and loans, along with the angels and venture capital funds. So 8 years after it started, Consilient ceased operating, and it was the middle of that global financial crisis that we were all part of, and there were a variety of factors. Consilient closed in 2008. So our perspective, we're looking at Consilient 12 years later, and I say 12 because we collected the data in around 2000. So we looked at Consilient about 12 years after it stopped operating. And just to give you a sense of what we did, we interviewed 19 of the employees. We have LinkedIn data on another 40 or so that weren't interviewed. And we also spoke to some non-employees, government, people from government, people in the industry, some angel investors. So we had another 9 or so who talked to us about Consilient from that perspective. And I'll hand it over to Colin.
Thank you, Jacqui.
Right, so I'm going to talk really about the impacts that Consilient had on the ecosystem. The first point to make, building on what Jacqui was saying, this was a company with a lot of buzz. It was creating the sorts of jobs that didn't really exist in Newfoundland before then. It was recruiting young people in particular, rapidly promoting them, giving them great experience. And so one of its critical initial roles was to retain talent in the ecosystem. A lot of our interviewees said that without having access to the jobs in Consilient, they would have gone off island, as many Newfoundlanders do. Equally, they also attracted back as many Newfoundlanders who had gone away and were looking to come back, and this provided a way in which they came back. So this point about retaining and attracting back talent was the first critical impact that Consilient had. And kind of jumping ahead, of course, when Consilient closed, these folks stayed in the ecosystem. All our respondents were sort of just how attractive a company it was, particularly for software engineers, because of the cutting edge technology, the growth potential, the size of the company, and the culture as well. It was really a very attractive company to work for. Second important point was that Consilient built human capital. It very effectively developed the talent of the people who worked there. Again, our interviews talked about the learning opportunities that they had, that they were given lots of opportunities at an early age that we wouldn't have had if they were in other more traditional employers. Again, the technical folk were saying that one of the learning opportunities, or one of the ways which they developed, was to learn management skills. So if somebody came in as a software engineer, so developed a technical competence, but very quickly were involved in management as well. So they recruited people who were engineers and turned them into engineer managers. So that was critical too. And several people talked too about the Consilient diaspora. The folk who'd worked for Consilient and then either, well, it was still operating or actually closed down. They kind of, these Consilient former employees worked in the ecosystem, and people talk about that being a valuable asset, that this network that was created. Now, when the company, so that's kind of the first one. Same pandemic, when Consilient failed, this human capital just disappear, of course. The talent was recycled in the ecosystem. There's a huge demand for Consilient employees from other tech companies in the ecosystem. Some of our interviews were saying that I think the announcement of Consilient's failure was midday, I think on a Thursday, and by the end of the Friday, most people had actually got job offers. So it was a very rapid absorption of Consilient employees, reflecting the demand in the ecosystem for the Consilient talent. So that was kind of the first positive impact. It's seeded the ecosystem with human capital, with talented individuals. The second point I had was entrepreneurial learning. Consilient had a huge demonstration effect. It showed what was possible. You could build a world-class, leading-edge international company from Newfoundland. So that kind of psychological impact was really quite critical as well. And then another form of learning or spillover was the whole ecosystem derived important learning from Consilient. First of all, there was a kind of learning from failure. I mean, sure, we've all talked to entrepreneurs who say actually that failure is a more valuable learning experience than success. So entrepreneurs learn more from failure than they've had to do from success. So there's a lot of learning, looking at the signs, early signs of companies differently. That was important. There was also learning for investors. Clearly, investors lost money in the business, but the investors talked about they found valuable learning from the experience as well. And thirdly, learning kind of who to invest with, or what kinds of investment partners should you choose. And the broader effects for the province, as I say, this kind of psychological impact. You can build a global company from the age of the North American continent, as verified, and of course, is subsequently shown as well. You can build companies around leading edge technologies. Jackie said, a lot of the tech companies at the time tended to be consultancy companies, consulting a product-based company. That was a valuable lesson. And thirdly, just the ambition. You should be ambitious. You can build big in this region. Again, that was an important demonstration and lesson that came through. And again, I mean, as Jack also said, Consilient was really probably the first company in the province to attract significant venture capital. Again, that was a demonstration, a good demonstration of where you can attract finance to this region. So all of this kind of had a positive impact on the psychology of the ecosystem and the startup community. Of course, there were negative effects. But again, the consensus of our interviewees was that these were fairly short term. I'm sure investors kind of stopped investing for a little while, nursing their losses, but that didn't last for too long. So our interview didn't really pick up much in the way of negative effects. The whole tenor of the people we talked to was the impact of the failure were really very positive on the ecosystem. So just stepping back and drawing wider lessons, both for community in the province and much wider. I think first, everyone would agree that government has to be involved in building entrepreneurial ecosystems. And if you look at ecosystems kind of around the world, government is an important player in because I mean, I've done quite a lot of work on the Atlantic Canada ecosystem. Government played huge important roles in building an ecosystem in all parts of Atlantic Canada. But the second point clearly is that both government and the wider community have to have a tolerance for failure of government-supported projects. Not every funded project is going to be successful. Talk to any venture capitalist, talk to any business angel, they'll tell you that as well. In fact, the odds of having a successful return is probably 20% for a business, or even less for a business angel or a venture capital fund. So failure is in the nature of building technology ecosystems. Third point, and the most crucial point, is that government-funded businesses that subsequently fail never generate positive economic outcomes. The investment outcomes from funding companies, especially the human capital, don't suddenly disappear when the company fails. They're still there and they get recycled. Moreover, these outcomes are non-quantifiable, so the kind of standard economic analysis of the impact of government support doesn't really effectively pick up these very important impacts of government funding. And then perhaps a third point is the need for a long-term perspective. And we know that the nature of political cycles mean often that policy making is very short-term. You have to take a long-term perspective. So government shouldn't be afraid of investing to support businesses. But, and there's an important but, they have to be selective in the types of companies that they support. You're not going to get the same kind of spillover effects if you fund, say, an Amazon warehouse which closes compared with a high-tech company like Consilient that closes. So the positive effect of Consilient arose precisely because it was technology rich and effective in developing human capital. That's the kind of companies that government should be supporting. Because there will be success from that kind of support, whether the company itself is successful, or even if the company is not successful, as in Consilient, because of the spillover effects on the ecosystem. I think that is it. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin. And now Boyan and Mandy have been tracking online, and we have an esteemed group in the room, and we have a mic in the middle of the room if you're loud like me. But Boyan has a mic, we can get to you if you put up your hand. If you're online, use the Q&A box, and Boyan and Mandy will, or Mandy will keep track of those, and Boyan will help with the questions. If you're in the room, raise your hand. Wherever you are, say who you are briefly, and ask a question. Who would like to kick us off here? Any online already there, Mandy?
None yet, no.
Okay. And this is a topic close to my heart, so people know I hate dead air, so I'll certainly get us into it. Or Dave, you ready to go?
Sure.
Okay, John, or I think you're close to the mic, Dave. You can say who you are.
This one is for the people in the room. This one will pick up for.
Okay.
I'm Dave Freshwater. I work a lot for the Harris Center, but I live in Kentucky now, and I'm interested in entrepreneurship, but rural entrepreneurship and rural innovation, which is why I'm here. Okay, so the bigger picture is that Canada is widely seen as being real good at R&D, but sucking at actually bringing it to market. And Consilient is an example of a fairly long list, and some of the place that I started thinking about this was Massey Ferguson. It's one of the biggest tractor manufacturers in North America. It's probably Spy, except it blew its budget on developing an axial flow combine, which costs it all its money, and then its competitors just reverse engineered it. So Massey Ferguson went out there. Nortel was the biggest switching company in North America, telephone switches. And that was spun out of AT&T to make handsets for Canada, but upgraded its technology, but it went. And then more recently, Corel. Most of you aren't old enough to remember WordPerfect, but WordPerfect was the dominant word processing software for a long time. Corel's gone. More recently, BlackBerry. Bombardier is about to vaporize, dominated regional jets. So the litany of Canadian companies that are innovative but hit a wall is long and varied. And I think we need to figure out why. And I think some of that has to do with, at some point, the American market becomes too attractive, or the American market recognizes it, and because it's bigger, richer, and faster, Canadian companies just get done in. Boeing killed Bombardier because it didn't want the regional jet that they sold to Airbus for $1 to be successful in North America. And that's a fact of life, that when the Americans get aroused, they will kill you. So I think that's sort of that bigger perspective. And I guess I take issue with your last conclusion, that government should only support tech-rich companies, because in essence, that means government only supports companies in cities. And there's a lot of innovation in rural areas, and there's a lot of people in rural areas, and there's a lot of firms in rural areas that do first stage processing, and Canada still relies heavily on first stage processing of natural resources. If we aren't good at that, the national economy is going to be in trouble. Yeah, Toronto's really interesting, but there's a lot of money comes out of resource processing. Not really questions, but comments.
Good to get us going, Dave. Thanks. And just for people to know, even though he's in Kentucky, he's from Canada and spent a lot of time in Newfoundland. Colin, I think a lot of that is regional development, entrepreneurship stuff. Why don't you go first?
Well, my thoughts when you were making your observation goes back to the book The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christopherson, whose thesis was that successful companies typically get blindsided and fail. And perhaps American companies, well, Kodak is a great example, blindsided particularly by shifts in technology. In UK, in Europe, Nokia is another example. So you can argue that's just the nature of the economic process, that companies are successful in one technology paradigm often fail to make the transition to, the computing industry is really full of that. So I think that's just the way it is, would be my thought about that.
Jacqui, you want to, or Blair, ready to go?
Sorry, Jackie, you go next.
I guess my first thought was Nortel, RIM, Bombardier, some of the other ones. Wow, I don't even put Consilient in the same category of these more mature companies that have probably thousands of employees. Consilient made it 8 years. It might have peaked at 100 employees-ish. Brad, the first day I walked in my office, I said you when I was talking about the company, and he said, you better learn very fast. This is we now. I'll never forget that very first comment. We never made it to any of those levels to even be compared. We were very much a startup, even 8 years in the startup world. And the churn for developing products back then and trying to keep alive and trying to keep all the employees, it was a different struggle. I don't disagree with anything you said, but I can't put that in the Consilient story. We have a different story, I think, than that. I don't disagree with anything you said. The point about we should only support tech companies, that's near and dear to my heart because I'm a rural entrepreneur studier myself. I think the point was you have to be careful who you fund. You just can't fund everybody. And honestly, today, if even the rural companies, if they don't have some technology going on, I'm not sure they're a great investment. And I can look at that from different perspectives. But the online, just the basic in the rural world, right? Online presence, that type of thing. Everyone needs to be innovative and embrace technology. Doesn't matter, maybe especially if you're rural. So those are my comments on that.
Thanks, Jacqui. Often there's a distinction between being high tech and using high tech.
Absolutely.
Blair, you want to weigh in on this one?
Just a couple of comments back to David on this one. I'd like to see the examination of your premise that we are particularly bad and the Americans are always eating our lunch, that we need to separate that from the noise or from the usual turnover, which is what Colin was saying in our economy. And as a Canadian, and most Canadians always feel that the Americans are eating our lunch. But I wonder, is that premise in fact supported by the data and how we would parse that?
Yeah.
And
I don't think anybody's tested it.
Pardon?
I don't think anybody has tested it.
No. So there you go. In 10 years' time, we'll sit here and we'll do that work.
Not me. I'm old.
The other, and then now that was your first sort of opening and going to the back end, which is rural innovation and where to invest. And what we are arguing for is just a few more criteria for if you're investing in supposed technology companies, being sure that you have examined some of these non-quantifiable benefits that Consilient demonstrates, that we saw from Consilient, and knowing that 8 or 9 out of 10 of your investments is not going to be successful. And that I don't think we're certainly saying, I think one of the most innovative rural things that's happened in this province has nothing to do with technology, is the Shore Fast and the Fogo Island Inn. Who would ever think to build a luxury inn on Fogo Island and be successful at it on top of it? So we're parsing within the tech sector where what we're saying here.
Thank you all. Good start. Mandy, anything online?
Yeah, I've got a couple questions online. Our first one is from Mike Blair. And Mike says, the Corporation Acts of the province prohibits a bankrupt from becoming the director of a company. Is this a major disadvantage for our entrepreneurial sector?
Thank you, Mike. Always
Wow.
provocative. Who'd like to weigh into that one?
I think the act says when you're in the state of bankrupt, when you're in a bankrupt, once you've been discharged as a bankrupt, you can be a director again. So that's a very short, small window, and I can't imagine has any effect on anything. That's how I view it.
Does Mike know of a significant impact from that? And he can respond on the chat line, but I just wonder, because until you're discharged, you're not allowed to do many things as a bankrupt.
Exactly.
But once you're discharged, once you're forgiven.
What a question to ask
you're
to a
back.
lawyer sitting on a panel.
Yeah.
Let him away.
We can get out a pin for these two to dance on now. Sorry. Mandy, you have another one there?
Yes, I do. So we have some here from Professor Richard Shermer. He says, thanks for the very interesting presentations and discussion. Failure is part of the innovative process. Does the fact that we are still discussing Consilient 14 years later mean that there has not been sufficient failure in Newfoundland or St. John's?
That's a great question.
There's Richard is based at McGill, and he'll be doing a sabbatical here next fall, doing work on the ocean tech sector. So panel, not enough failure. I don't think we've ever asked that in Newfoundland.
I'm sure we've had a lot of failure, and I would not like anyone to think this is a one-off conversation about just Consilience, the only company that's ever failed. It's the company we're studying because it had such a great impact. It was so early days, and we're still talking about it 14 years later. To me, is all part of the positive effect that it had on the ecosystem. But I'm sure I'd like to think we're getting better at failure, but I have no data to support that. That's a great question.
It might be that Michelle Sims, who's here, or Dave King, or Ron Taylor, who's here, might have some comment on that. But Richard, one of the things that Jacqui and I are particularly attracted by is that I'm going to bring in Newfoundland culture, which seems to, which I would argue is less forgiving of failure and almost in some ways rejoices in the failure in a sort of a jealous way. And that is another factor that attracted us to look at Consilient, because and our report talks about the impact on the ecosystem from what happened to Trevor Adey, who was the other founder, and Trevor will talk in a few minutes. But one of the things that happened, because Consilient was such a public company, and it was interesting for us to look at it from the perspective of what happened to the co-founders and how the ecosystem responded to that very public failure. And one of the findings that we had is we suspect is that the entrepreneurial generations that have come after, or the entrepreneurs that have come after Consilient, have been far more circumspect than to make themselves the public face of entrepreneurship in Newfoundland. So for example, the founders of three founders of Verifin, I'm looking at Michelle for, while they have a public persona, I don't think it was as prominent even with their successes at the moment, is as that of Trevor back 15 years ago. So maybe that gives you a flavor of it, and I look forward next year when you're here to talking more about that.
Anyone in Dave? Boy and Dave right next to you.
Hi, my name is Dave King. I used to run Genesis. I think it's fabulous findings and it's, excellent in terms of developing a whole culture here. But it just didn't start with Consilience. It started with Ultimate East, which became Stratus Global. And then those people learned how to manage tech companies, right? And then they started Consilience. So, but timing is everything too. That was going on. There was a technology sector being developed there, and they weren't all doing websites. That's where Jamie King and them started. Body was started. They were all looking at global markets. And so when this failure happened, there was a receptor group to take it. Now, we didn't have on that part at the same time. We need both of those things happening. But the other part that's interesting to me is that now works the other way. Because my son has a technology company, 15 employees. Each employee is always getting sold by everything. It's gone the other way. So, but that's the way it should work.
That's the way.
And we need to work that way. So that's all I said. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Thank you, Dave. Panel, anything on that?
Good points.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Good points.
Others in the room? Okay, we got Ron and then to the back, and then Mandy, I'll come back to you.
I'm just going to comment a little about risk, and I think that.
Remind us who you are, please.
Sorry, I'm Ron Taylor. I used to be the CEO of what's called Natty, which is now Tech NL for a number of years, and worked very much with the startup community and worked with Consilient and the people that were there at that time, and many of them afterwards. So I think the one thing that I found that was positive afterwards is that initially. When Consilient failed, all you saw was the cost, the $6 million that was on all the media. And we focused on that in a big way. And governments, a lot about governments, and I work with both federal and provincial governments, and even municipal for many years, is that they're by nature they're risk averse. And when something like that happens and it hits all, the first thing they do is run for cover. And they didn't really have a way to message it afterwards or to really talk about it. And I think since then is that I've seen that certainly at the provincial and federal level is that they become more receptive to risk. They understand it's part of the DNA of the startup sector. And so that when things do go sideways, they understand that, okay, that didn't just close down. They just didn't close shop and everybody went somewhere else. We just moved on to the next opportunity. So I think that if nothing else is that it created governments to be more receptive and understand that if you're going to be involved in startup, specifically the technology community, is it comes with risk. And I remember telling them many times is that, look, if you can't look at, 60, 70, 80% failure rate, you should be in this business because that's what you're looking at. Those people are not leaving here. They're going on to start the next company. And I've seen that happen time and time again. So I think that overall is that from the standpoint of the public sector is that they become more receptive, they become more invested, and they're more involved in the sector on a day-to-day basis. So I think that in that sense, that's been very positive.
Thanks, Ron. Boy, and then gentleman at the back there. And anybody on the panel, anything to add to that? Okay.
Good.
Good point.
Thank you. Hi, my name is James Reed. I'm a reporter with Newfoundland and Labrador. I cover the tech industry, so that's why I'm here today. My question kind of has two parts, and I'm curious a bit more about what led to Consilient's failure. You mentioned that it was heavily reliant on government funding and angels and VC. Does that mean that the company never really was able to gain much revenue from actual customer sales? Because you also mentioned that employees were traveling all over the world in order to try and make those sales, I assume. And the other side of that is the 2008 kind of economic failure. Did that kind of put the nail in the coffin for the company? Do you think that if global market conditions were better, that maybe Consilient would have been able to make it out the other side?
Thank you. And I don't know if Jacqui wants to go first on that one. We will have Trevor in 10 minutes, probably for 5 minutes. So Jacqui.
I guess we anticipated why did it fail question. And the first point we're going to make is that's not what we studied. And so we can all give you our subjective view of what we think, but if we don't, we are not here to tell you why it failed. Trevor can certainly tell you why he think it failed, but he would be far more the expert on that than we would. What was interesting to us is the employees all wanted to weigh in on why it failed. And that from a researcher perspective, we found that rather interesting. And there were all kinds of opinions and, you know, a lot of comments about how it, you know, wasn't inevitable and it was inevitable. And so we were fascinated by the number of employees who wanted to comment on why it failed. And I'm skirting the answer to your question because we did not study that. And you know, we might all have opinions on it, but we don't wish to weigh in on why Consilient failed.
Colin, you're from Scotland. Do you want to risk an answer?
Well, I think the point is that explaining failure is subjective. And there's lots of research that looks at failure cases and looks at the different stakeholders and their explanation of failure, and you get different explanations, and that's what came through in a study. Some folks thought the kind of failure was inevitable, and we had some people saying that they left the company because they thought the company was going to hit problems. Others thought the company could have been turned around when it hit difficulties. So there was no consensus on why Consilient failed amongst the folk that we talked to, which I think is consistent with what the wider research evidence on why do companies fail shows.
Blair, did you want to weigh in on this one?
No, I think my colleagues have said.
Okay.
But you had two questions. What was the second question?
About the effect of the 2008 economic crash.
I mean, I think a lot of people would agree it was a perfect storm of all kinds of factors happening. The industry was very dynamic. A lot of big players jumped in and, you know, the dynamics of the market, the industry, the economics, the VCs were green to the tech world. And it was a whole bunch of factors, I think, that we would all say, but I don't know if there's any one factor that we would like to comment on. We heard a lot of different reasons from the employees.
And we're here till 11:30, so we got lots of time. We're going to hear from Trevor in a few minutes, but I'll see if Mandy has another question first. But Blair, you were going to.
I was just going to say on that 2008, again, multifactorial, but the investors at that time, of course, would have been aware of the meltdown in the world economy. And we can speculate, it would only be speculation, but I think reasonable speculation to say that would chill a little bit their desire for risk at that time, right? It would be a standard response to the, what did Maynard Keynes say about the markets? You know, the animal spirits, I think is his phrase. And whether that was in their minds, possibly, but we were not going back to, we were interested in the impacts, what happened, and the failure was taken as a given in our work. And then as to why it failed, we didn't do that, and we didn't talk to certain key players. They weren't prepared to talk to us. So.
Mandy, other questions online there?
Yes, I do have a question online for Brian. And Brian asks, with respect to the transition to renewable resource development and the recent excitement of private wind hydrogen investment, do you have any thoughts or advice regarding alternative technologies and how policymakers can remain agnostic as to not pick winners?
There's a simple question.
Thanks, Brian, for that one.
Yeah. When's your book coming out on that, Blair?
Yeah.
I bet Colin has an opinion on that.
That's a tricky one. I mean, that's always the criticism that government is exposed to. Oh, you're picking winners, and that's seen as a no-no. But that's the nature of government support. I mean, if we think back to a previous era of of government intervention. Particularly I'm thinking Scotland here, where the policy emphasis was trying to attract international firms to set up production facilities in Scotland. Although the language of picking winners wasn't used in that era, in effect they were. But going back to our early discussion about what kinds of businesses should government support, these were classic examples of technology mature operations who were kind of bribed to come to less economically developed regions, and they typically only stuck around for a few years and then moved off somewhere else where the production costs were lower and the financial incentives were larger. So a lot of the companies that were lured to Scotland, and this would be true of other regions as well, didn't stick around long and moved away, which I think reinforces my point that of the importance of being selective in the sorts of companies that you support. You don't want to be funding mature technology companies. You don't want to be funding companies that are only providing production jobs. You want the full gamut of jobs. You want research jobs. You want managerial jobs, as well as you want really the whole hierarchy of jobs if you're supporting companies. But I think picking winners is inevitable. That government can't avoid that.
Yep.
Brian, I want to, if I channel the poli-sci person in me, I would say that government plays a significant role in setting up the regulatory environment and these are the alternative energy sources or sustainable energy sources. That's being played out in the market that David Freshwater mentioned at the very beginning, so the market will decide who the winners are, and does government really need to invest that much? So I see two sides to that, and one, intense involvement in making sure that the regulatory environment and its priorities, be they employment or economic development more generally, play out. And then the other side is to which company and to what type of technology. Perhaps the market is better placed to determine that.
But maybe another dimension of this is kind of what happens to the profits? Do you want kind of global companies to come in, exploit the resources and really not leave very much behind? Or do you want to create locally owned companies where the full gamut of jobs will be created, where the profits are retained and reinvested here? I think that's one of the important issues in any kind of economic development. Too much of, I think, economic development such as this is exploitative, and the profits just are sucked away, leaving very little behind.
It's the beauty of a study like this, because there's a lot of people who focus on the micro. How do you get individual firms with a technology, with a market to succeed? But if you're in policy, how does that relate to the region? And how do you get to that regional, sectoral? And so, Jacqui, did you have a final word on this one?
Yeah, and it feeds exactly off what you're saying. Based on our research, my recommendation for government policy would be feed whatever sector you're going to put all your money in. Feed the local startup world. Educate them, keep them involved, give them money to grow and be, secondary processors or support companies, but make sure they learn all the things they can from the big companies that come in, and learn how to retain their IP and learn how to play the game with the bigger companies. And that's part of government's role, to keep talent in the province.
So we're going to go, I think there's one more question ready, and then we'll go, and we'll let that be answered. And then we'll go to Trevor for 5 minutes, and then we'll have more Q&A. Mandy.
Okay, we have a question here from Harry Hutchings. He says he was involved in the IT and government sector. He's wondering how important was partnering with potential clients to Consilient to develop and refine its products.
Jacqui might know it from experience. Did your research touch on that?
The research, I would say, touched on a lot of the employees talked about how great it was for them to be involved in conversations with Research in Motion at the time, with the partnerships that Consilient developed overseas, working with a lot of telecoms over in Singapore and other places. So I would think from the development of talent and employees, we worked with a lot of different partners. I mean, some of the comments, we work with companies in Silicon Valley. Who else was doing that in the early 2000s, So partnerships were a big part of it, and I think the employees learned a lot from that. I think that came out loud and clear in the literature and in the research.
Blair, Colin, want to add to that? Okay, so Trevor, are we going to bring down the screen for Trevor? There we go. Sure, Ted, in the transition there.
So.
Say who you are there, sir, please.
Ted Howell. I did have a quick look at the paper. I think Trevor actually shared it on social media. In any event, a lot of discussion about talent development, talent retention, a lot of discussion about funders and attitudes and behavior of funders and that sort of thing. What happened to the IP? Did the IP have any value at the time of the failure? And what happened to the IP?
That again, may be one better for Trevor, but I don't know, Jacqui or team, did you address that?
Trevor could probably answer this. I only know what I read in the media, and the media said that the IP was taken by the VC, and I believe I read that shared with other companies. I have no idea if that's true, so that's not my lawyer hat on. Trevor's great question for Trevor.
Thanks, Ted. So Trevor, I'm sure you could speak a long, long time on this, but I think you and the team have agreed to 5 minutes. So, and then we'll go to more Q&A. So Trevor, 5 minutes and the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for attending, and thanks to the organizers and the authors to put all the energy you did into this. I'm happy to answer any questions now, and if anybody wants to contact me after, I'm a total open book and transparent on my thoughts around Consilient, but I'd like to focus on really the positive stuff before I get into the negative stuff, and think more about forward-looking issues in the light of what's in the rearview mirror. So, you know, when I read the report, the thing that kept on reoccurring to me was the learning of all the team that we had at Consilient. And if you all read the report, I draw your attention to, it seemed to me that that was the dominant theme, is that scientific process of conducting an experiment, i.e. building a software product, getting feedback, does it work or not? If it doesn't work, repeat. And that ongoing methodology, facilitated Consilient getting to many places. But then if we step away from that experience and think about the experience of, I hate to use the word startup, but innovative companies that build new products, well, that is the Darwinism of that process. And if you don't have the guts for that, well, go back to work to whoever you want to work for. But that's what that process is all about. And if you enjoy that, it does bring a sense of fulfillment that I don't think many other careers or lifestyles can bring. So, when I look at the report and think of what is the most important learning moving forward, it's beyond a shadow of a doubt is just that we need to produce more teams of founders. When you think of what's important to transitioning an economy and building new companies, it is just like seeding a lawn. And the more seeds, that word seed funding and seed company, the reason for it, it comes from the agricultural term of trying to build a lawn. And the more of those seeds you have in place, then the more likely you're going to build a viable economy. So to my mind, if you look at what's going on in St. John's now, and you think of what CoLab is doing, MISA is doing, Milk Movement is doing, and AMCO is doing, to my mind, Newfoundland and Canada needs many, many more of those in order to transition our economy from a resource-based economy to a knowledge-based economy. And I would say that, the challenge that Newfoundland thinks about and these cultural issues that we've talked about, they're not unique to Newfoundland. They're rural issues, and they're common everywhere across Canada and in other countries. The good news is that the tech sector is moving out of San Francisco because it's too expensive in San Francisco, and because if you look at the industries that are affected by tech right now, so if you look at the industry I'm in, is logistics and supply chain. Logistics logistics and supply chain that's causing inflation, affecting the global economy. It's one of the biggest things that VCs are investing in. And guess what? Logistics companies aren't in San Francisco. They're in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and in other places like that around the world. So the investment is moving from San Francisco to more rural locations. It's worth just talking about, and I know I only have 5 minutes, so I could go on forever, but it's worth just talking about Dave King's son, John King, and Milk Movement, to think about, a new company. And it's just like Collab and MISA. The biggest factor in building a new company is what we call the TAM, or the total addressable market. You need $1 billion TAM in order to build a company that's going to interest venture capitalists and private money. And I was involved with Dave's son, John, in his early days, and worked with him to find the first investment they got out of Chattanooga, Tennessee, because that is a logistics company. And the fund that I work with, we actually wanted to invest in Milk Movement, but they had so much positiveness around the company. It was actually oversubscribed. We were working with a lead investor out of Montreal, Innovia, and they failed. So there was no, they failed to get the allotment. So there was no allotment left for us. And so to circle back to government policy, I'm all over the place here, but sorry, it's only have 5 minutes. To my mind, government policy should be behind private money. The best way to decide where ACOA, NRC, the different government entities should invest is if you have independent, objective private money that's willing to fund a company that has a massive total addressable market, and if you have the private money, if their belly's at the bar, then I think the government money should feel comfortable. And one thing that I'll just crystallize that maybe others don't feel as comfortable crystallizing, if you invest in a tech company in St. John's, Newfoundland, let's say the company raises $1 million. Let's say it's $500,000 from the government and $500,000 in private. 95% of that money is reinvested in St. John's, Newfoundland. Those folks buy houses and cars and food. You're not buying a big piece of equipment that's being sent to that's being bought in Germany or some other place in the world. So people continue to forget. We've talked about the recycling of resources to build a sector, but the money actually stays in the geography. And if you look at places, organizations like the CASE, the big pension fund in Quebec, that's exactly why they drive local investment, because they know you get the spin-offs that this group has talked about, but you also get financial spin-offs. Well, let me run down through some other things. I know I only have a few moments. I really think the key to the future is building more founders. And what are the two fundamental ingredients in founders? It's alignment with the STEM programs at MUN, computer science, engineering, and math, with the requirements of companies like Verifin, Shopify. The more aligned the curriculum is at MUN with those organizations, and the more graduates we can produce from the STEM faculties, the more likely that we're going to get founders. Also, the better our immigration policy is in Canada and Newfoundland. I applaud what the provincial government did in the Ukraine. The more likely you'll get folks with risk tolerance that are willing to be involved in the new these new areas. So that's some of the bigger issues in terms of Consilient. Why did we fail? We failed because we didn't have enough customer revenue or private investment to keep the doors open. At the end of the day, the trigger was pulled by a subordinated debenture that we had from a VC called Quorum out of Central Canada. Interestingly enough, the Quorum money was another government investment. So in a strange way, the federal government blew up their own investment. But I take 100% responsibility for the fact that the company ended. At the end of the day, we could have reduced our employees. We saw not to. We did think that we could raise additional capital, but we couldn't come to an agreement around the table. And so the IP went to quorum. What they did with it, I am unsure. Just bringing it back to Newfoundland for a second, as I mentioned, I'm in the VC sector and I'm in Austin, Texas today. We're a limited partner in a venture capital firm called 8BC. You can look them up. Joe Lonsdale is the guy who runs 8BC. Two of their biggest investment areas, or three of their biggest investment areas, are logistics and freight, which is why we're partnered with them. But their other two big areas are digital government and digital healthcare. So if you read the Green Report, it seems to me that both the healthcare system and the public service are, let's call them, small challenges for Newfoundland's future. I would argue that if somehow you could combine, a lot of investment in the STEM programs at MUN and programs through Genesis and MCE to think about the future of digital government and the future of digital healthcare, then there could be all kinds of benefits to the Newfoundland economy. And I should just mention the Genesis, Dave and Michelle's, Dave King, who used to lead up Genesis, and now Michelle for a long time has led it up, all the great work they've done, as well as the Memorial Center for Entrepreneurialism. I would, however, also say it would be interesting to look at a bar chart of the budget that goes into the Genesis Center and Memorial Center for Entrepreneurialism. And I would argue that their budgets could be dramatically increased if we're serious about driving the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Newfoundland, and if it's not just going to be a poster child. And I would say that part of the reason why we're talking about Consilient 14 years later is that we don't have enough founders and we don't have enough growth companies in Newfoundland. And there could be lots of things done on the funding side and on the programming side to dramatically increase that in Newfoundland. But that must be 5 minutes. Those are the fundamental things I had to say, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Trevor. That was a little over 5, but not bad at all. So thank you so much. Blair, did you want to weigh in quickly there?
Just a couple of things, Trevor. I never thought we'd be able to keep you to 5 minutes. So thank you. For those who don't know, I just wanted to publicly acknowledge Trevor was very helpful in getting us access to the data. So people are reluctant to be interviewed by academics, and Trevor was very instrumental and supportive in getting former Consilient employees to agree to be interviewed and other people. It is, and I'm going to belabor this point just a little bit, it is very difficult, it's impossible for me as a researcher if I do not have what we call access to the data, which in this case is people who are prepared to be interviewed. We can't do our work. And Trevor was instrumental in organizing and encouraging people. And you'll also notice a second point. So thank you, Trevor, for helping the research for it to occur. The second point I would make is you will notice in the report that Trevor is mentioned by name and the quotes that are attributed to him are named, and that was at his request. He did not want to be anonymized. That wasn't a mistake on the part of the researchers. So thank you, Trevor.
All right, so back to online and in the room. Mandy, online.
Yes, we have a question here from Mike Clare. You can see it on screen as well. Mike says, regarding government investment, Dan Bresnitz makes the distinction between an innovative strategy that prioritizes startups and an industrial strategy that prioritizes existing firms that are scaling up. How can government tell which strategy it should be taking? What strategy should we be adopting today in this province?
That looks like a Colin question to me, but I'm sure all the others, maybe including Trevor, may have thoughts on that. Colin, want to go first?
Well, I think both strategies could be subject to the criticism of picking winners. So if you're either picking winners in the form of businesses or you're picking winners in terms of sectors. I mean, new technology often doesn't fit comfortably into a particular sector. a single sector, and sector boundaries are kind of fuzzy. So I'm not convinced by the validity of picking kind of sector winners. I think I just don't think that's the way the economy works. I mean, when I've been interviewing companies and trying to classify them into a sector, even between are they a manufacturing firm or are they a service firm, it's often very possible to say they're one or other. I remember one very successful company in Glasgow I interviewed about 10 years ago. They were a manufacturing company, but they had a key kind of service component. So they provided a product plus services to their customers. And they said, if we were just a manufacturing company, we wouldn't be able to compete with low-cost producers from China or whatever. It's only because we build a service around the product that we're competitive. So the real world is very messy and doesn't really kind of fit into neat compartments that many of us like to think about.
How much of a distinction is there in that? And I'll just say this, Trevor, and then see what you think of what you've heard so far, between startups and scale-ups. So you can have sectoral industrial policy, but there has been an emphasis in the last number of years. It's not just about entrepreneurs and new firms creation, but with working with individual firms, it's still picking winners. But the distinction between startups versus scale-ups. Colin, anything on that? And then Trevor and others.
One approach is to kind of view the local economy as a kind of funnel system. You've got to have scale-ups. So you've got to have startups to produce scale-ups. That's one view. And there's some research that suggests that maybe only 5 or 6% of startups are going to scale. I did some work in the UK about 10 years ago called the Vital 6%. We tracked a cohort of startups, and just 6% of these startups created over 50% of the jobs created by the cohort as a whole. So I think you need policy. Again, it's not a one, to use a golfing metaphor, it's not just a one club policy. You need policies to produce startups, but then you also need policies to come in later on to support those startups that have got potential to scale. So you've got policies, you've got a whole suite of policies. Right. That are not just startup policies, not just scale-up policies. You need a whole suite of policies.
Thanks. Trevor, you were going to jump in there?
Yeah, totally. So, my golden rule would be to follow the money. At the end of the day, if you have private investment at the table that is relatively objective, that is the best source that government has, that the legitimacy of the project, as opposed to my mind, government judges. But then practically in Newfoundland, I think we have to acknowledge that, we have the oil and gas sector that's doing so well, and the fishing sector, and the tourism sector. But do we have, medium-sized businesses that are funded by private equity that would be that growth? To my mind, it is the opportunity is mostly startup. It also muddies the water to say that most startups are now not just technology company. In the past, everybody would, so some kind of line between tech and everything else, as opposed to now, tech is in everything. So whether it's digital healthcare or digital logistics or digital education, it's all digital. So the idea that you'd feel some comfort that I'm funding this nifty little digital or tech company, because now everything is digitizing. So it's the alignment between the Newfoundland healthcare system and maybe some solutions that can be created in Newfoundland to make the healthcare system, maybe doctors not use paper charts. I heard they still use paper charts. Is that true? But maybe there's some projects that can be done in alignment with large industries that solve major markets that can be built in Newfoundland for the government, or for healthcare, or for tourism, and then those projects can have a total addressable market much larger. So you can incubate the company in Newfoundland and then sell it in the rest of Canada and in the US. Yeah.
Thanks, Trevor. And I do see anyone who wants to go back to the online forum and the digital recording, we have an amazing cadre of international and national experts and local, and there's lots of buzz there. David Wolf just weighed in from the U of T Monk Center, who's a leader in innovation studies in the country, saying they have a report on the scale-up issue in particular and federal innovation policy. Blair or Jacqui, anything further on this point?
So, Mike, I guess a couple of comments. One, you've identified a tension in all public policy between we want to fund startup and then we want to fund scalable startups. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Usually the funding of startups doesn't cost that much as opposed to scalable startups or scalable business investment, which is usually far more significant and attracts the private money that Trevor is talking about. So why not have both would be my point. However, I think we should recognize in the literature and among many economic developers, if I can say this without too much data, is that there is certainly a desire to focus on scalable startups. So the Consilience of the world, the Verafins of the world that are going to grow and have a desire, they're born to go big or go home, as the expression is, that's the ones you do want to pay particular attention to. My only problem with that is that some small startups or startups that start up without that ambition can also be scalable and in innocuous or in non-sexy businesses. And I always like to use as my primary example of that is a burger joint called McDonald's, which started up as just a couple of restaurants and has grown into a global scaled business model. Okay, I'll stop there.
Jacqui, anything you want to add to this one?
Only to say that government's role is to find the proper balance of both. I don't think you can have one or the other. I think it's a very place-based decision. And to go back to what Trevor said about we're missing founders, don't have enough startups. So to start picking industries to help build before you have a foundation of a lot of companies out there being seeded, I think would be a disservice to the people. I think it requires a lot of thought about what's happening in Newfoundland, what our statistics are showing, and how we can kind of seed the industry better before we start throwing all our money into one particular sector.
We're down to less than 15 minutes, but that's pretty good. Mandy, any others online there? One topic that Dave kicked us off on in the Q&A was on the rural-urban distinction. And I do wonder about the go big or go home, which we need in the Canadian economy. We need the scalable. I was always a big fan of what the US had on business retention and expansion, which is working with existing firms and finding out what they need. And we know in our province and across the country with the demographics, succession planning is a massive issue where there are viable firms that have a market that are successful in rural areas and urban, and there's no one to take over the firm. And so any thoughts on the Consilient experience or your research on that? And then I'll look in the room one last time to see if anybody has any thoughts or questions on that or anything else. Anybody on that rural urban final thought?
Well, I mean, I think from a general international point of view, we do undervalue the family firm. And family firms often are, I mean, I'm thinking the Scotland case, many of Scotland's most successful companies are family firms, and very often they're in smaller towns and rural areas, very often the kind of resource based. I think in all this discussion about entrepreneurial ecosystems and so on, we do very much undervalue the family firm, and of course the succession issues that they often.
Jacqui, anything on that as someone who's done a lot of work in this province and rural and beyond?
Yeah, I guess my thoughts on that are it's once again, in a different way of looking at it, is that there's no one to take over successful firms. Speaks for the lack of founders and entrepreneurial mindset and people thinking that they can and should and they have the skills to actually start companies. And I don't think in Newfoundland or Canada we have done a great job of producing that mindset. So to me, it all starts very foundational. And I think that it's showing in the mature companies who aren't able to keep going because we have not seeded those mindsets properly.
Of course, I mean, another aspect is I mean, successful companies often end up getting sold. I mean, that's the whole venture capital model. If you've got venture capital in your company, ultimately they need an exit, and that means the company's got to get sold. We saw this in terms of Verifin, and there's a whole debate about whether that is actually good. Should we be growing successful companies that we end up getting sold off to global tech? I mean, I think from what I read, Verifin's done a very good deal to make sure that a lot of the dangers of acquired companies doesn't happen with them. But I think that is an issue. Do we, again, it's back, I probably realised from my comments, I think the importance of local ownership is so critical. We don't want to lose our successful companies to just become part of global companies.
And I do see Dave Freshwater is going to jump in quickly, and then Trevor, I think, and we'll be pretty much out of time then. One quick further thought I'd add is I think the essence of this study really is how the mentality about failure existed at the time. But I do think based on the success of the tech sector and other firms, maybe oil had a big impact, but there is still a regional difference. I think the St. John's region with the activity, and Dave talks about his son benefiting from the firms ahead of him and now facing them taking his employees. That's an ecosystem that's alive and vibrant. And I suspect the response to a failing firm now is very different in the St. John's region than it was in Trevor's day with Consilient. But beyond the overpass, as we say in this province, it probably is not, the scarcity mentality maybe continues, and Jacqui's nodding. So Freshwater, quickly on how you want to comment or question.
Yeah, I think it's a little simplistic to say that there's a lack of entrepreneurship in rural areas. The biggest impediment in rural areas is very incomplete capital markets. Even if you want to take over a business and you may be able to arrange the 75% of the loans that you want to pay for it, you still need 25% equity, or else the lenders can't play. And there's a good reason for that. They're lenders, they're not investors. And for somebody in a small town, there is no place to get that extra 25%. There's nobody, no friends and family to borrow from. So places don't sell and they close.
So Boyan, get the mic to Dave King, who has a quick response, and then Trevor, and then I'll let the panel have their final thoughts to pull up the session.
I just couldn't respond to that because Modern, where you and I went in Spain, they went through all that, and what they did is kind of co-op, and they're extremely successful.
And Dave just came from Fogo, and he met Shorefast and was impressed by that. He was really, speaking for Dave here, he was really impressed by the Fogo Island Co-op and the amazing stuff they're doing with the Marine Institute, et cetera. Trevor, final thought?
So final thought is build. And I don't care if that's building something to make codfish better, or building a Fogo Island Inn, or building software, not import from China. We need to build more stuff and figure out the ways to motivate founders to build it, figure out how to capitalize it, and figure out where to sell it to. But it all starts with some young woman or man that wants to build something to get a sense of fulfillment. And it doesn't have to be software. I'm totally with that. It can be a pair of jeans, can be better codfish. And you should ask yourself too, are you eating Newfoundland cod today, or are you buying your farm salmon at Costco? It's the people that are eating Newfoundland cod that'll figure out Newfoundland's future. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Trevor. So I'm going to go to the panel for quick short snappers to clue up. Colin.
Well, just on the Mondragon, I had the privilege of meeting on several occasions the late Father Greg MacLeod in Cape Breton, and I remember him quoting the Mondragon founder, "When money leaves an area, suitcases follow." And again, it's back to my point about retaining and recycling wealth within the economy. I mean, including purchasing, as Trevor says, ultimately is the way to build a successful economy. Create the wealth, but make sure it stays in the province.
Thank you, Colin. Jacqui, final thoughts from this piece of work? And
it was a real thrill, and I just want to thank everyone for coming out and people on the line, and we're so happy we can tell the story, and the conversation needs to be had and needs to continue. So thank you, and look forward to further conversations.
Super. Blair.
Jacqui said it all. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Colin and Jacqui particularly.
Thank you all for coming out in person and loads and loads of great colleagues and interested folk online. You can access the team's full research report on the Harris Centre website, www.harriscentre.mun.ca/Harris Centre. You can download the PDF and you can also watch the recording of this session. Thanks to Mandy, Boyan, Kathy, John Duff, the ubiquitous John Duff, who's actually going to be leaving us for a new career very soon. We're heartbroken, but very excited for him and Kate. And we know we'll be keeping in touch. So thank you, John. The rest of the team at the Harris Centre and the Amira Innovation Exchange, staff at Conferences Event Services for helping with today's session. And thank you, Trevor, for your help to the team and participation today. And especially for Blair, Jacqui, and Colin for the excellent report, superb session. This is a really important topic for this province, and we need more critical, rigorous research like this because it's easy to operate with wishful thinking, and scholarship has its place in shaping good policy. So thank you, team, for that. And we look forward to seeing you again at our next Harris Centre event. All the best.